Alright, so I know most of you like the idea of maybe going to a fast food restaurant and ordering like a hamburger, or maybe adding some bacon, or if not, a chicken sandwich. But what most of you guys don't realize is what exactly is in the meat that you eat and where exactly does it come from. So today I'm going to talk about where this meat comes from and how the meat is being treated before you consume it. And so, just to get things straight, cattle aren't treated like in that heaven place that you see where they're roaming around and drinking water from a river. They're actually in confined type places and just treated with brutality. And today I want to talk about the negative effects that industrial farming has. And I'll be doing this by talking about how the workers treat them in the farms, the economic problems that it causes us, the environmental problems, and how it affects us as consumers. So this is an image of cows and how they're compacted all together. These are big animals and they have like a small space to themselves. And these are the chickens. They always stay inside. They never see the sunlight. And these are the pigs that are always in these. They're in like their own cages and they never get out or move around or anything. For the cows, they have to be dehorned, which is that they cut off the horns off, and the chickens are debeaked, and the pigs have their tails cut off. And all this is a very painful process, and they're not given any painkillers at all. So they feel all this pain. And the website Mercy for Animals talks how the chickens are like stepped on, and like they step on them brutally, so they end up dying. They're kicked, they're pushed, and etc. I also want to get into the hormones that they use on the cows. So they use this hormone implant gun, and this is a GIF. And in the GIF you can see the cow was moving, like trying not to get the hormone insert. And so this was from the Business Insider blog by Julia Calderon. She states how instead of using a syringe, they use this hormone implant gun, and what it does, it inserts the pellet inside, and it distributes within the blood vessels, and it goes around the body, and it promotes growth. And they're also fed unnatural foods that they're not supposed to eat. For example, cows, they eat corn instead of grass. And when they consume this corn, it inflates their stomachs inflates, and it crushes their lungs, making it hard for them to breathe. And so when this happens, they're taken to a field. They have a tube inserted in their throat, so they could release the air. And then they eat some grass, and they go back to normal, but then they take them back to eat corn again. And with the cows and the chickens, they're fed antibiotics, and these antibiotics also help them to. It just helps with promoting the growth, so they could get bigger. Now I want to get into the environmental problems caused by industrial farming. One of them is the manure lagoons, and this is an image from the farm sanctuary, and the cattle produces 1 million tons of manure per day, which is 3 times more than the human population. And the size of these manure lagoons is the size of several football fields, and so as you can imagine, that is a lot of manure. Also, these can cause leakage, which can go into the groundwater, or even leak into the ocean. And there was a situation where it did, and it killed 110,000 fishes from the ocean because of the leakage from here. Another environmental problem is the water that they use for animal agricultural use. As you can see in this image right here, for non-industrial use is 4%, and in animal agricultural use is 47%. They use a lot of water just for one cow, and just so they could feed like a couple people. But instead of doing that, the water that they're going to use on the cow, they should water the plants, and they could feed a lot more people with that, but they don't. And so to me, that's just like a bad way of using water. I also want to get into the how it affects us as consumers. As I mentioned, that they're fed unnatural foods like the antibiotics and cows eating corn. When cows eat corn, their meat becomes very saturated, which is bad fat, so they have saturated fat. And the Farm Sanctuary webpage that I was looking at, they stated how since the saturated fat is correlated with heart disease and obesity, so the more we consume this meat, we have a higher risk of being obese and having heart disease problems. Also the sanitation from these places, like the farms and like the slaughterhouses, is very bad. And these farms, these animals are basically living in their own filth, and when they go to the slaughterhouse, like they grind up all the meat together, and like the workers don't bother to take out things that aren't supposed to go in the meat, and so they just grind it all together, and they think nobody's gonna notice because it's all grinded together, so you can't really tell. And also, I want to mention this incident that happened. I believe it was in a Jack in the Box that the manager decided not to fully cook the meat because he wanted it to be nice and soft. And so when he didn't fully cook the meat, the people who went to the restaurant and ate the meat had E. coli, and so all of them suffered permanent damages. And there was, I believe, I think it was 10 or 12 kids. Oh no, it was like 4 kids that were like 10 to 12-year-olds that actually died because of this. It was because of the E. coli. And it was just because of a mistake that a manager made not fully cooking the meat. And so I just hope that today you guys learned a thing or two, and you think about next time maybe when you're eating or you're going to a fast food restaurant, like, should I really eat this, or but yeah, and thank you.
All right, well, I think the visualization at the beginning is a little bit thin. I think you raise a couple of questions as a attention device, and then you do tell us what your point is. I did think that that was very clear, what your thesis was, and there's a bit of a preview. It was a little confusing because I think you rushed through it. It sounded like there were going to be 4 points. I think it turns out that there are only 3. A couple of the points run together a bit. The content of the speech is problematic because other than 1 or 2 places, there's not really much citation of information. You tell us where some of the visuals that you had came from, and there is one vague reference to a website that had some of the information on it, but you've got a whole bunch of incidents and examples that you point to that are not quoted directly. They're vaguely referred to. There's no source citation that goes along with them, and that's a little bit problematic. You're even uncertain as to what restaurant it is at the end that had this problem with the food. I think you were right. I think it is Jack in the Box. That's the story I remember. By the way, that story is at least 20 years old, so the question then becomes, do you have anything more contemporary? I know that because I remembered the story, but other people aren't going to know that, and that's one of the problems here, that the information is kept at such an abstract level that it's not going to be as convincing as you want it to be. which, by the way, is another thing that's a little bit awkward about the presentation. It's much more of a persuasive speech than it is an informative speech. I do think that you could be telling us about how concentrated animal feeding operations work, how industrial farming is different than traditional farming methods, that there are potential dangers that go along with those things. But in the long run, it seems like you're presenting a position that suggests that these are all problematic, that there's nothing about them that is desirable. You've kind of, like I said, got vague references to what gets mixed in the meat, and that sounds to me like you are presenting an argument against meat consumption, but not presenting it as that kind of an argument. But that's really what the underlying premise there is, and that's a persuasive presentation. This might have been more appropriate to wait for and save for that persuasive presentation. Presentation issues. You have some of the same body movement issues that Xavier had, kind of turning back and forth to the screen. You have a tendency to stand a little sideways. When you do look at us, your eye contact is less frequent than it needs to be, and your facial expressions, I think, are a little more subdued than you want. If you're going to be outraged about something, you ought to look like you're outraged about something. If you think something is dangerous, you ought to be conveying that. And you generally have a tendency to not engage. I thought it was maybe a little bit better in the last part of the speech, closer to the exit, where you do feel a little bit more like you are engaging with us. I appreciated the fact that you're not dependent on notes. However, I do think that you need to make sure that you have the data accurate in your presentation. The vocal presentation, we can hear you for the most part, although I do think it's a little on the quiet side. I do think, like I said, with your facial expressions, you need a little bit more variety that's going on there. But it's paced about right. I didn't see anything that was particularly anxious or nervous. I just think that you could be a little bit more immediate and engaging with some changes in your vocal performance. All right, thank you.